What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another First Look Fanduel Week 14 edition of the NFL DFS season. My name is Jared Block, lead NFL analyst for RotoRadar Daily Fantasy Sports. If you've watched our streams in the past, whether it be on Twitch or here, we use Tuesday for the FanDuel First Look. We use Wednesday for DraftKings First Look, and we kind of take a first overall glance at the main slate, the Sunday main slate. We're moving into December now. We have 13 weeks of DFS under our belts, and let's go ahead and start things off with a first look at the Week 14 NFL DFS slate on FanDuel. I got the chat with me here. We've been talking about sports books, prop books, DFS all afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started because I have not clicked on this QB tab yet. So first things first, we have Patrick Mahomes going up against Denver. Kansas City, a rough road loss against the Cincinnati Bengals for the third time in 2022. So they're down bad. They're looking for a nice streamer win, and they get a pretty good matchup here against Denver. Now, Denver's defense has been great. So with that being said, probably taking a step down on Mahomes a little bit. We finally saw him go under that 25 FanDuel point floor that he had seen for over the last month. 8,800 still feels like a lot there, but you do have pretty elite quarterbacks on this slate. The last week of bye weeks, we got some teams that have had mobile quarterbacks either get injured or otherwise. And so still a really, really nice pool of players here at the top of the pricing. Josh Allen against the Jets, another tough matchup here. So we're starting off with two really tough matchups for these quarterbacks. Allen's had a little bit of a flukier month than Mahomes has had. There's some turnovers going Josh Allen's direction now. There seems to be a little bit of regression in the negatives for Josh. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say that he's the best quarterback play on the slate, but it's hard not to say that Mahomes and Allen shouldn't be considered in cash. When it comes to Jalen Hurts going up against the New York Giants, this is where I start to have some interest. I know that he is a little bit cheaper than the guys that we just talked about, and we know that he's not going to have necessarily the passing volume of a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen, but a lot of his production comes from the ground, right? And we saw him do it again, but this time he didn't actually do it on the ground against Tennessee, which we know is a pass funnel. We know that Tennessee is very good in stopping the run. So what did he do? He threw the ball 39 times, and a lot of that to A.J. Brown, and put up one of his best performances of the season, actually his best performance of the season. So I think that Hurts can get it done either way, and I love the ability to get Hurts in a game where he can play 4 quarters. That's the biggest thing for me always for him. Can the Philadelphia Eagles play 4 quarters of consistent, put your foot on the pedal, and get there through 4 quarters? So that's been my major concern for him all season. I loved playing him against Green Bay. I feel like there was enough there on the motivation side for Green Bay to be able to push the Eagles to actually play more than a half of football, because we've seen time in and time out, not only does he get there in the first half in a lot of these games, like he had 25 FanDuel points in the first half on Sunday, but can you go that extra mile and force them to play 4 quarters of football? We'll see this week against the New York Giants. I think that there is a situation where he'll have to do that. And while the Giants have played solid defense this year, the last month or so has really, really fallen off for them. And this is a very, very important game for the Eagles to win. We saw the Cowboys, who are now an extreme threat in the NFC East. Minnesota gets to face Detroit today. So Philly is going to have to play and try to, maintain that number 1 seed. So I think that Jalen Hurts is a phenomenal play at quarterback this week. He's probably my favorite quarterback so far that we've talked about, and most likely going to be the guy that we start this first look with. Let's continue to talk about the others, though. Joe Burrow put up a fantastic performance against the Kansas City Chiefs. Kind of saw that one coming. He was in our first look builds last week around this time, and you really just see that Cincinnati, in games that are must-wins for them, they just go all out in the passing game. Did not expect this rushing stuff from Burrow, but he's done it now over the last 2 weeks. I would say that's still a little bit on the higher end of his outcomes, but I think it's still something we can take a look at. But you take a look at the last time they played Cleveland and the previous times that Joe Burrow as a Cincinnati Bengal has played Cleveland, and you see some of his worst outcomes as a professional. So 14 FanDuel points against Cleveland, played really rough in that game. It was Halloween night, their coach had passed away. The night before that, it was in Cleveland. The Browns were pretty sizable underdogs. I think that there's just something about the way that Kevin Stefanski, head coach of the Browns, schemes for Cincinnati to where they're just forcing the Bengals to run on them. And I don't really know if I love that for Joe Burrow here, so I'll probably get off where others may stay on. And I'm off of the Burrow train this week. I respect Cleveland enough. I know they have some things to figure out with Deshaun Watson, but I do think that this game is going to be pretty low scoring. I would bank on Joe Burrow not having as good a performance as last week. Dak Prescott against Houston. I have extreme interest in the running backs and some other plays on Dallas. Houston is just such a run funnel that they don't even need. Like the reason that they have a good opponent ranking is because teams just don't have to throw on them. Now, I'm not going to say anything bad about Derek Stingley because he's amazing and he's had a really good year, but he's been out and injured now. And I think that this is a situation where we're going to talk about the running backs. Dak and Zeke and Tony Pollard are my cover boys for this video. So if you're going to watch this on YouTube, this is where you'll find that thumbnail. It's going to be Zeke and Tony Pollard. And so I'm off of Dak for that reason. And we can move on here. I think that we have some interesting spots for both Geno Smith and Kirk Cousins. I think many, and I'm not saying that I won't because I probably will recommend Cousins. I think many will start their cash builds here, and I don't have any issue with it. But the problem for Cousins is that he provides zero floor in the run department, right? We know that he is a pocket passer. We know that he has the ability to throw 35 to 50 times like we saw in the Buffalo game. But again, he passed the ball 50 times and got 17 Fanduel points. Like, that's not what we want. So again, we played Trevor Lawrence last week. The Lions have been very good against the run over the past month. So we'll let people chase the Cook performance, which again was good last week, but it's not going to be as good this week. And, I don't have a problem going to Kirk Cousins, although I think we can maybe get there with getting either Adam Thielen, TJ Hawkinson, or Justin Jefferson. John, I'll get to your question when we get to running back. But yeah, Bacon, he has the ability to break a 10-yard run. We know that that's in his outcomes. Done it 2 times this year. But yeah, I think Cousins is just fine for a streamer. He's a great option if you need a quarterback in fantasy for season long. I think you can do something with his props here. But the touchdowns are just really inconsistent, and he's just a really good quarterback in this system. And there's nothing bad to say, but where I draw the line is not having the ability to run the ball in DFS. So maybe this is a DraftKings play. I have not checked pricing on him for DK, so maybe we'll find that out tomorrow on tomorrow's stream. So tune in. If you guys are watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe this video. It'll redirect you to the DraftKings First Look that comes out on Wednesday night. So we'll talk about Kirk Cousins tomorrow a little bit more. But on FanDuel, I think he's in play for cash, but I'll probably end up getting exposure somewhere else to where we can benefit from that. Jared Goff against the Vikings is very interesting. He was one of my favorite plays in tournaments at 6,800 last week, and he gets the spot against the Minnesota Vikings now, which we did see Mike White do pretty well in that matchup. So I think Goff and the Lions are favorites for a reason, and I think that people will underestimate that spot this week yet again. And so while Jared Goff can make a lot of mistakes, the box score speaks for itself last week, 340 passing yards. And this is where he's a much better DraftKings play than FanDuel, right? It goes back to our conversation before this video started. We talked about the fact of the DraftKings versus FanDuel, where do we want things? Jared Goff, he never went for 300 plus yards outside of that one game against Seattle. He threw for over 300 yards and had 2 passing touchdowns, and he gave you 24 DraftKings points instead of 21 on FanDuel. So I'm not expecting him to throw the ball 40 times in this spot, but I do think it's a possibility. I think we've kind of exhausted. Oh, one more thing we should touch on. We know as of the recording of this video on Tuesday that Lamar Jackson, while not ruled out for Week 14, has a sprained PCL in his knee. And so I do feel like we're going to get Tyler Huntley against Pittsburgh. It's a very important AFC North matchup. And while he gave you all the volume you wanted. 32 passing attempts when Lamar left the game, 10 rushing attempts. We know that he has the ability to do things on the ground, possibly better than Lamar Jackson. I don't want to be that guy, but Tyler Huntley seems to have more juice in the legs and just in general since he hasn't been playing for 13 weeks. So I think that Huntley is actually quite interesting. I do want to talk about him more on DraftKings tomorrow because I think that there's actually a situation where he has the 100-yard plus bonus on the ground in play next week. So if he could do that against the Ravens, and I know that he was the only touchdown that they provided there, I do think that while the matchup against Pittsburgh has its ups and downs, the pass rush could force Huntley to run. So that's all I'll say on that for now. I don't think he's in play for cash on Fanduel as of this moment, but again, as we're building teams and as we kind of maneuver around that, maybe he becomes more in play. I do think, though, that Jalen Hurts, as of right now, is the best cash game quarterback on Fanduel, and this, again, is Tuesday, so bear with me on that one. Take it with a grain of salt. Take every play with a grain of salt as we talk through this first look. Derrick Henry, 9K against Jacksonville. Dalvin Cook, 8,700 against Detroit. Now, again, we've seen this spot before. We talked about Travis Etienne last week. I know that Etienne was dealing with an issue, a foot issue, but I worry a little bit about Dalvin's effectiveness in the run game. He looked solid. 20 for 86 is solid. Like, it's 4 yards a carry. Got the rushing touchdown early. Wasn't really involved in the passing game. I know they were playing prevent pretty much the entire second half. But I do think that Dalvin Cook is a little bit overpriced for where I would like to put him this week. And he also always has Alexander Madison. And so Minnesota's going to run into the situation where their total is great. They're underdogs, so I would expect them to pass a little bit more. It's going to be more of a shootout type scenario. But I think that you can get better plays on Minnesota without having to go to Dalvin Cook. So it's the same way I feel about Kirk Cousins, but I think Dalvin Cook's actually a little bit too overpriced for this matchup. Joe Mixon, we'll have to see whether or not he goes. If he does not go, Samaje Perine at 7,800 is a phenomenal play. Again, I don't want to skip over this, but we're going to do it really quickly. I cannot believe, this is again why we have DFS edges, right? Samaje Perine was about 60% owned on FanDuel. He was about 40% owned on DraftKings on the main slate last week. And people did not prepare accordingly to put Samaje Perine in their builds. And now, we're going to get the comments and people in here saying like, oh, well, he was chalk. Guys, I don't think NFL DFS ownership at 40% in a cash game is chalk. Chalk is David Montgomery week 7. Chalk is Tony Pollard 90%. That is not like this is again. We can spend different streams and other things on chalk plays versus non-chalk plays for FanDuel and DraftKings, but Samaje Perine is getting 20 plus touches. He's getting the bulk of the passing game work, even with Jamar Chase back. He did not get in the end zone last week, but on volume alone, the $7,800 price tag is still good enough to where he's a lock and load if Mixon were to miss. And I do feel like we're in a situation where we can confidently state that he should be in the top of the player pool as of right now. So I won't click his name just yet, but expect that it's coming. Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley. All these guys are in pretty tough matchups. The only one that's not is, Chubb probably has the best matchup out of the three. But this is a great tournament area this week. McCaffrey, Chubb, Barkley. Again, I don't love to play running backs against Tampa Bay ever, and the same thing goes for Philadelphia this season, so I'm off of Barkley and McCaffrey for this first look. But when it comes to Chubb, I think you can talk me into it. However, I would just rather have the guy on the other side of the ball. Cleveland's run defense is bottom 3. That is accurate. And I think that's what we saw from Dameon Pierce in a negative script last week was enough to get me to be sold on that spot. So now let's talk about Zeke and Tony Pollard, because I think this is where things start to get really interesting for cash. So we haven't had a cash game play until this 8K mark. Zeke at 8K, Tony Pollard at 7,500. Tony Pollard outscored Zeke last week, and he did it mainly on the touchdowns, right? Like Dallas put up an insane amount of touchdowns last week. They scored over 50 real life points. I could see a scenario where they do it again. They obviously are in a situation where they don't care how many points they're going to put up. They don't care about putting their foot on or taking their foot off the gas. They are just going to destroy the Houston Texans this week. The problem is, and I'm getting to John's point here right now, can you go both Pollard and Zeke this week? And I think the answer in tournaments is simply absolutely. Many will make the argument this week that you have to choose one. And while I agree with that to a certain extent, do not shy away from playing both. They're going to give Zeke 15 to 17 opportunities on the ground. He's not going to be as involved in the passing game. It's going to be more of Tony Pollard's role. And we even saw their third string, Malik Davis, score a touchdown last week too. This Dallas offense is really turning things around, and their offensive line is going to get healthier, and this is just one of the best matchups of the season. So when deciding between Elliott and Pollard, it's one of the toughest decisions on the slate. And so as of right now, I think I am going to lean Tony Pollard. I like what I'm seeing a little bit more from his pass game role, and now it wasn't really relevant yesterday or last week. It has been in the past. And so I think that, and again, I know Zeke was out for this week. So Tony Pollard just has the ability to be a little bit more explosive and get you those 20 Fanduel plus performant games. Whereas Zeke is just he's just a really consistent floor option, which again, you're like, Jared, why did you just suggest the guy that has the worst floor? Zeke has hit 15 Fanduel points in 5 straight games, and many will still look at that and be like, well, I don't know if I want to play him at 8K. I think you still can. So maybe we find ourselves in a situation where we're playing Zeke over Pollard this week when it comes down to premium content, but as of right now, I am going to side with Tony Pollard. I think Zeke is one of the best anytime touchdown performances in terms of props this week. I think Pollard is just as safe of a bet. So I think it's more about potentially saving the extra $500 to get there. You do need one of these Dallas Cowboys running backs if you're going to roster them to get in the end zone, but I think there's enough here to say that there's a really good chance that that's going to happen. But we did just see Nick Chubb not score against the Houston Texans, which is again another bad beat that we had last week. But whatever, we're gonna move on. I'm gonna roster Tony Pollard to get that role this week. So we're gonna go with P. Ryan and Pollard to start things off here. And I know that we're already kind of starting pretty heavy in terms of price tags, but let's continue to move down and find things that we like. ETN is gonna find himself in GPP consideration. Same thing with Pacheco. Same thing with DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders. Like, all these guys are in a spot where they're just too close to P. Ryan and Pollard to garner much ownership, and the spots for those guys are just unbelievable. So I'm going to keep going with that. Donta Foreman against Seattle is interesting at 6,900. I know that the vibes in Carolina still aren't the best, and I know that he's been dealing with injury, but this was a really solid performance workload-wise. He didn't get in the end zone, so he's not going to pop necessarily, but it's a good matchup. I know he's banged up. He is in cash player pool consideration. As far as other guys, I'm not touching any Tampa Bay running backs in these matchups. I didn't play any of them in the spot last night against the Saints. Sorry, I don't know why I blanked there. I didn't play any of them against the Saints, and everybody that rostered White pretty much got bailed out by that last second touchdown. So you saw them just struggle to run the ball efficiently yesterday, and you're going to see them have a really tough time trying to do that against San Francisco. So I'm off of that there. I still think Najee Harris is banged up. I have no interest in this spot, even though it is 6,700 against Baltimore. We may have some interesting plays here depending on if Michael Carter is in or out. I think I was on Zonovan Knight for a lot of the week. He was in our first look stuff, and towards the end of the week, I kind of just fell back off of it because of the fact that there was a 3 RBBC, but it turned out that James Robinson just wasn't involved at all, and neither was Ty Johnson. So I I think if Carter misses another week, which I find it hard to believe he'll miss again, but if he does, Zonovan Knight's extremely interesting down here. Let's see here. This is a situation where we're not going to have too much value opening up necessarily. But what we could see, and this is, again, a first look, and so we're going to put in a player that I'm not, like, super sold on, but you're going to want somebody from Seattle if Kenneth Walker's not able to go. And we saw him go down with that ankle injury, and this is going to be a situation where Pete Carroll is not going to give us any information. He's just not going to give us any positive or negative news. He's going to remain positive when it's probably a pretty bleak outcome for Kenneth Walker here. I would expect Seattle, where they're at in the playoff contention in this point of the season, to give Kenneth Walker a week off against a Carolina team that they should be able to handle without much pressure, especially with this being in Seattle and having the 12 behind them. So I'd expect Kenneth Walker to sit here. And we also knew that Travis Homer was ruled out last week. So I think this is going to be an interesting situation where we would have then Tony Jones Jr., DJ Dallas, and potentially whoever they would call up from the practice squad. It's kind of funny. I didn't know that Darwin Thompson was on this team. But I would expect that Travis Homer would be active for this game. But you're going to probably want one of DJ Dallas, Travis Homer, Tony Jones. Tony Jones is more of that, like, Mark Ingram back, where he's going to be more of the in-between the tackles kind of guy. Against Carolina, I don't mind that. DJ Dallas is more of an all-around kind of do everything, do a little bit of everything. So for this moment, we're going to put DJ Dallas in here, but just for the record, so you have to pick one of these guys if Kenneth Walker's out this week. It's just too big of a price tag discrepancy. And it's just getting the one right. Seattle's a very heavy smokescreen team, so we may not get any clear news about this until way, way late in the week, but I would expect Kenneth Walker misses. So we'll put DJ Dallas in here to get that salary savings of $6K. Now what we're going to do that's different than normal is instead of going to wide receiver, we're going to go right to defense, and we're going to look to save some money here. So what we'll go ahead and do is look to where we can save money. Wow, Fanduel actually broke the barrier. They broke the ceiling barrier of $5K for once. Okay. I don't think we have the money to get there in cash at all. But if you're playing defense, I mean, tournament builds with Pollard, Zeke, and the Dallas defense sounds pretty good on paper. But yeah, I'm not going to have any interest probably above 4K. And I think the field has caught on to paying, we've seen 50% owned defenses sub 3,500. And then it just seems to be the way that things go these days. So I'm not taking Houston. Detroit presents some interesting opportunity with as many passes that will be thrown in that game. Denver against Kansas City, not something I love. Cleveland's defense has not been great, but they did put up a fantastic performance last week against Houston. What can we look to here? We'll put the Cleveland Browns in as of right now. See if they can do the same thing that they've done to Cincinnati the past couple of times they faced off. 3,300 again, first look. I'm just going to punt to defense and move on and give us some more money to spend for our last four positions. Wide receiver, Justin Jefferson up at the top. Jamar Chase. Amon-Ra St. Brown finds himself above Stephon Diggs on this slate, which is nuts. But he keeps producing. So out of the top 3-4 guys, you're going to want one. I think that just given the pricing discount, you'll probably want some Amon-Ra St. Brown exposure. Although I will say Justin Jefferson in this matchup feels unfadable. I do expect things to be pushed here. I expect him to find the end zone, and I definitely expect more than 45 receiving yards. I think a lot of that had to do with Sauce Gardner. That just proves how elite of a play Justin Jefferson is, considering that he has just elite matchup on both sides last week. So I do think that right now I probably lean Justin Jefferson over ARSB, but it is certainly close. You need to have one of them. We'll start with Justin Jefferson here. Okay. Now I think we're going to probably find ourselves in a situation where we're rostering two 6K guys. So the first one that's going to stand out to me, actually, yeah, okay. We need to find out where Garrett Wilson is. That's where I need to find out where he is. So, again, like I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown's a great play. I think A.J. Brown's a great play. CeeDee Lamb, I have my worries about, considering that I just don't think that Dallas is going to be pushed. So he may score a touchdown early, but I don't think that he's going to be very involved in this game. Let's move down the list, though. I think that Christian Kirk against Tennessee is a phenomenal play. We know that Tennessee is a run-stopping machine. They funnel in the pass, and I think Christian Kirk, of anybody, is a very solid play in this mid-tier. He was a little bit expensive for me last week, so I didn't go there on Fanduel, but he's definitely a strong option. Chris Godwin against San Francisco. Tough matchup on the ground for Tampa Bay. I could see them going back to Godwin, and he doesn't get a price increase from what he did yesterday. He wasn't all worldly yesterday on Monday Night Football, but 13 targets over the past 2 games, respectively, is very good for Godwin. Maybe a DraftKings play tomorrow. I feel like both of these guys are going to be in the low 6s. All right, Garrett Wilson against Buffalo, 7,200. Feels a little bit expensive, right? But we can't deny the volume that we've seen in this spot with Mike White. 8 targets 2 weeks ago, 15 targets against Minnesota in a comeback scenario. No touchdowns, but got 20 FanDuel points. 7,200. If you're going somewhere in the 7K range, I would highly suggest taking a look at Garrett Wilson. I want to just survey everything else around here because I don't want to miss something, but things could get very interesting for this lower range here. I think that Thielen is a great pivot off of Justin Jefferson. You're obviously going to lose like 6 targets with that, but it certainly is interesting. Zay Jones against Tennessee after basically doing nothing, I think is interesting last week. Just as a starter play in this range. Keep an eye on Treylon Burks. He had a concussion last week. It was a brutal hit. He basically got knocked out as he was catching a touchdown. So we're not going to go his way for a first look. George Pickens at 6,300 presents some interesting opportunity. He had 2 targets last week, which is probably going to push me off him for cash. But we saw this morning and in that game him being very vocal, and it's now just starting to hit the news about getting more targets and getting him the ball. So maybe there's a squeaky wheel narrative there. Nico Collins against Dallas is somewhat interesting. He kind of got bailed out by a touchdown last week. Tyler Huntley to Demarcus Robinson feels ugly. All right. Well, if Treylon Burks is out, maybe I have some interest in Robert Woods at 5,800. DJ Chark last week had this narrative. He looks a little bit more involved. But Jameson Williams is on the rise and on the return, so I'm not sure how I feel about this. I do think that we can go that way, though, so I probably will end up clicking his name. Yeah, so what we'll do right now, just for the sake of time, we're obviously going to circle back on this later in the week, but let's go ahead and click Garrett Wilson, and let's go ahead and click DJ Chark, and that should put us in a pretty interesting spot to where we should have plenty enough money for a tight end. 4,500 is actually not where I wanted to be, so whatever. We'll look at that, but Kelsey at 8K feels like he's overpriced for this matchup, although he can break a slate at any point, just not for cash games. Mark Andrews feels like he's taking a dip here in price. I think that a few things factor in here. Tougher matchup against Pittsburgh, and he has Tyler Huntley as his quarterback, although I don't think that's a big downgrade. TJ Hawkinson against his old team in Detroit is phenomenal. So maybe what we do is make a few pivots here. Actually, that is what we're going to do. Well, I think Justin Jefferson is elite. I do kind of want this Hawkinson play. So what we'll go and do here is get off of Jefferson, play Hawk, and then that should leave us close to Amon-Ra St. Brown if I get off of Chark. Nope, it's not. Well, I guess we're doing this live on the air, guys. So what we'll do instead of Amon-Ra St. Brown is we'll still go. Maybe we go. We'll just mess around with some stuff here. But anyway, we'll go back to the tight end conversation. TJ Hawkinson against Detroit. Not only is it a revenge matchup in a really, really good spot, but the volume, since he's been in Minnesota, has been very impressive. And I think that they could give him the opportunity to be a feature player. Only one touchdown in his time with Minnesota, but it still is very solid. And he's had a lot of bad matchups. Now comes into a great one. George Kittle against Tampa, I think that they'll try to use him to be more of a run blocker to try to move the football, although I do think it's an interesting spot. Nothing really stands out. Pat Freiermuth is getting a little bit more expensive. Dalton Schultz, same conversation about CeeDee Lamb. I don't think they'll be pushed very often. And then just nothing really pops. We don't really have a tight end injury to discuss. I mean, Daniel Bellinger's interesting. Just don't think there's enough there. Evan Ingram, potentially, against Tennessee, but he feels overpriced. Keep an eye on Cam Brate. If he's good to go, that takes out Cade Otton. Yeah, I mean, nothing stands out too much here. So maybe we do stick with Hawk. He kind of grades out. It's kind of Hawk and George Kittle, and that's kind of it, right? I will say the spot for Pat's all right. It's not that bad. So what we'll do here is we will play Hawk, and then I'll just figure it out. I know that leaves us in a weird territory. So what we'll do then is we will, just for the sake of this first look, see what's available here. I believe that the FanDuel minimum is 45, so we'll probably not be able to get anything down here. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to punt tight end, unfortunately. And we will have to get a guy in this range because I got to save at least $1,000 off of Hawkinson, or close to it. If Hayden Hurst is not able to go, I actually don't know off the top of my head. Usually I'm pretty good at this, but I don't know who the backup tight end is for Cincinnati. Mitchell Wilcox. Yeah, that's a good thing. I would never have known that. Ossie used to play for the Patriots. I don't mind this. Oh, Drew Sample was the name I was going to say. But for the sake of this first look, let's just put Mitchell Wilcox in there. All right, that leaves us with a much more manageable 6,300. We have some things to work with in this range. Yeah. All right. Zay Jones, George Pickens. I like both of those spots. I think that's definitely a very solid way to end this first look. So we'll go ahead and put Mr. Zay Jones in there to get that pass funnel for Jacksonville. All right, that'll do it. So after a little bit of maneuvering, it does feel like there's a little bit more to say about moving down from Jalen Hurts to potentially go Huntley's way. Maybe Jalen Hurts down to Kirk Cousins and trying to get that 20 FanDuel points. It's going to be hard to get Justin Jefferson this week, guys, without the value as of right now. We're doing this with a min-priced, basically, Mitchell Wilcox. If Hayden Hurst misses, as well as paying all the way down at defense, as well as trying to get a 6K RB2 replacement for the Kenneth Walker injury news that we don't know is happening yet. So lots of moving pieces. Make sure to like and subscribe to this video if you like it on YouTube. We'll be back on Twitch for Wednesday's DraftKings First Look, and that YouTube video will be up on Wednesday night of Week 14. And yeah, as always, see you at the top of the leaderboards. My name is Jarrett Block. Good night and good skill.